Have you ever noticed that nobody really talks about the future anymore? We don't really have a cohesive vision of the future as we did in the past. Think about it. In the 50s, there was this vision of the technology and colors of the time, but updated and made to look more science fiction. Think of a series like Fallout, the outdated tech that has been adapted to modern day standards, similar designs and colors, just newer. Or what about the 80s? Neon-clad cities with buildings that shoot off into the heavens, flying vehicles, self-lacing sneakers, cyberpunk prosthetics. Or what about Y2K futurism? The cool blues and chromes, alien-looking designs. All of these generations from the past had clear ideas of what the future could be, but when you think about the 2020s, nothing. What's going down, man? Peace to everybody. And I was just thinking, man. I was just watching some videos and reminiscing as all 20-something people who feel like they're running out of time do. But while I was watching these videos and looking at this cool and distinct imagery of what a hypothetical future could have been from the view of people in the late 90s and early 2000s, I realized something. Throughout the past, we've always dreamed of what the future could bring. We have exact images of what people of the 50s and 60s, the people of the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and even the early 2010s imagined the future to be like. But when I try to think about what are the common themes and the common images of the future that we like to think of here in the 2020s, I realized there isn't one. Us as a people have stopped really dreaming of the future and what it could be. We've stopped creating these surreal images and whatnot to show the edge of tomorrow. We've pretty much just settled into a fear and anxiety of what tomorrow holds and a constant and ever saturating rose tint on the glasses when we look to the past. So with all this, I'm just wondering, what happened? Why did we stop dreaming forward? Why have we stopped dreaming about the future, and why are we so much more invested in our past than we've ever been formerly? And if we've traded dreams of the future of tomorrow for the comfort of yesterday, is nostalgia really just comforting us, or is it killing our imaginations? So what I really want to do here is take a look at Retro Futurism, take a look at the visions of the future that we had in the past throughout different eras. We'll, of course, take a nice long look at the late 90s and early 2000s futurism that we all love so much, as well as the future that we all know we were supposed to have, but somehow slipped out of our fingers. And as we do so, we'll kind of try to figure out what happened to our dreams of a better tomorrow. Don't worry, I won't bore you too much with information, especially because I know that most of us, including me, are just here to see some of that sweet chrome stuff, but I think it is worth taking a look at the past and what was going on in each decade to figure out what was going on with their future. You know what I'm saying? So without further ado, let's get started with 100 years ago in the 1920s. So the 1920s was like a huge party, or at least that's what I got from the cliff notes I read for The Great Gatsby back in high school. But in all seriousness, there's a lot of parallels between the 1920s and today. There was a lot of inequality still with the end of slavery not being even a century prior. There were a lot of people coming over to America, which bred contempt from the people who came a few centuries earlier and pretended they'd always been here. Another story for another time. The KKK had a resurgence and Jim Crow was in full effect. This was also the time of Prohibition, which brought on a lot of organized crime, a lot of illegal wine and liquor being sold in speakeasies. There was a swarm of xenophobia and fear of communism, which began to take over the minds of the public, and not to mention the trauma caused by World War I, which pushed the U.S. inward as the country really just didn't want to get involved in other people's shit anymore. A lot of black people were moving north and west, trying to escape the prominent racism present in the South. There were more prominent city landscape as cities became larger and faster paced compared to the rural areas. There was a rise in consumerism as department stores rose and credit spending became a thing, fueling the capitalist society. Women finally got their rights to vote, which they always should have had, and the movement of the flapper, characterized by short skirts, bobbed hair, and jazz club attending women, became the new normal and hip. Speaking of jazz, this genre of music exploded with artists like Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, and Bessie Smith dominating. It represented rebellion, black brilliance, and new freedom. Over in Hollywood, the movie star was born as silent films began to take off. Radio became huge, creating celebrities of its own and giving businesses a new place to advertise things. Automobiles became more accessible, airplanes were becoming a new means of transportation, and Art Deco emerged with a new, sleek, symmetrical, and futuristic style. Think Chrysler Building in New York City. It's about motion, optimism, and luxury. The Roaring Twenties saw the future as now. It was about speed, it was about mobility, it was about technology. Skyscrapers rising, cars replacing horses, radios connecting the world, ads in science magazines pictured futuristic homes with automated appliances, intercoms, electric kitchens, not too far from what we'd come to have. There was a movement towards modernity and ease, escalators, elevators, factory lines, typewriters. All these advents made day-to-day life and work easier and more streamlined. There was a belief within society that technology could perfect life, that it could lead to immortality, enhanced intellect, or eternal progression. Not everyone bought into the dream and saw technological advancements as a wonder, though. Dystopia works like Metropolis 1927 showed a cold, divided tech future. Even then, people were aware of the gap between progress and humanity. Ultimately, the 1920s was obsessed with the idea of tomorrow, which in this case looked like a streamlined version of today. It was shinier and futurism and streamlined ease, social rebellion, and techno-utopia, at least for white people. But you know, that dream was always complicated by who was being left out of it. But if you know anything about history, you know that the 1930s took a little bit of a turn for the worse. Now, we all know the 1930s as the decade where everybody was depressed. I think that's what that means. No, but in all seriousness, the Great Depression is the big thing that we remember from the 1930s. In 1929, the stock market crashed, leaving almost an entire quarter of American population unemployed. While FDR was putting in place programs to try to get the country back on track, in other nations, things were just as, if not more, bleak. Dictators and tyrants like Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini would reach further than ever and attempt to sink their iron grips onto their nations and spread further out. With our own problems, the U.S. mostly tried to stay neutral in these and other nations' affairs. All while here, tent cities, bread lines, and mass migration from the Dust Bowl hit states like Texas and Oklahoma was happening. Our communities here in the African American part of the U.S. continue to see even tougher economic hardships and racism. Major strikes and mass exoduses took place as factory workers, farmhands, and steel workers demanded fair pay and work hours. Women had to face more inequality as they were pushed out of their positions in the workplace to make space for the recently unemployed men, leaving only roles to commonly see women working in to be teaching, nursing, and secretarial positions. Not all was bad though, because on the bright side, Hollywood was doing its thing in the 1930s. As the life of the everyman in America wasn't the best, the golden age of Hollywood was in full effect. Films like The Wizard of Oz, King Kong, and Snow White provided some much needed escapism for the public. Radios were in nearly every household at this point, with programs like The Shadow, Amos and Andy, and FDR's Fireside Chats becoming part of American identity. Swing music became the thing, with artists like Duke Ellington, Benny Goodman, and Ella Fitzgerald being prominent figures in these scenes. Dance halls offered a sense of joy in the dark times like these. With the tumultuous state of the nation, the 1930s really saw the future as salvation. Maybe more than ever, there was a real hope for a better tomorrow, being the time that really latched onto this saying. The 1939 New York World's Fair would introduce ideas like automated highways, high-rise cities, and suburban utopias. The Art Deco style would evolve into streamlined modern design. The design style smoothed out lines, evoking motion, speed, and progress. Think of radios, trains, and architecture with flowing curves and chrome. Cheap pulp magazines exploded with wild ideas, robots, ray guns, alien planets. Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers, and the writer H.G. Wells and early Asimov became pop icons. Some looked to science and planning as a way to fix this broken world, but not everybody was as convinced. We have works like A Brave New World, which saw early dystopia get its rise in the media. And as we will see in the next few years, it's almost prophetic. In the 1940s, World War II would officially take off and America would throw their hat into the war. The 1930s forced people to imagine a better future because the present was so unbearable. It wasn't dreamy like the 1920s, it was desperate, hopeful, and deeply political. The future became something to build, not just fantasize about. That's why even in the darkest time, sci-fi, comics, public works, and World's Fair visions flourished because people needed to believe in something beyond the moment. In the 1940s, things were very much more hostile. This was the atomic age. War and global transformation were rampant. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the U.S. was forced to defend themselves and to jump into the war. The country mobilized completely as factories shifted to war production and nearly every aspect of life became about victory. There were war bonds, rationing, propaganda, women in the workforce, and enlistment. Mass enlistment. The entire country lived in service of the war effort. FDR would be in the White House for a record fourth term, passing midway through the decade. Truman would step in and end the war by authorizing the atomic bomb, ushering in the idea of global annihilation due to the sheer amount of destruction that the atomic bomb could do. I know y'all seen Oppenheimer. I know y'all watched Oppenheimer. After the war, the U.S. would become a superpower. However, as tensions with the Soviet Union would grow, the Cold War would begin. There are things like the GI Bill, which supported veterans, but it also deepened racial inequality in the housing market and the field of education. As the country was at war, things weren't all peachy at home either. While black soldiers fought abroad, they still were treated unfairly back home. Japanese Americans were put in internment camps. While women picked up the slack in the factories while the men were off fighting post-war, a lot of them were pushed back into the household as the men came back. And our favorite generation to tease would come along as the baby boom would begin as returning soldiers began starting families, causing a huge population explosion. And look, yo, I know not all boomers are out. My mom is a boomer. My dad was a boomer. 1959 and 1962 respectively. So, that's the thing, but I don't know. Hollywood and other forms of media would spread propaganda as the government would use war movies, musicals, and cartoons to boost morale. But as the war ended, films got darker, gritty, cynical, and moody. Prominent examples being The Maltese Falcon and Double Indemnity. Swing dominated the early 40s, but by the mid to late decade, artists like Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie are breaking jazz wide open. Finally, something that I can tell you about without having to do much research, comic books would find their first boom period during the war. We had heroes like Superman, Batman, and Captain America becoming symbols of strength and unity, hope, and justice during the wartime. In the world of tech, radar, sonar, and cryptography were developed for war. The first general-purpose computer was created in 1945. Jet engines and rocketry pushed the boundaries of aviation in space, and of course, nuclear power would be realized. Shout out to Chris Nolan. Some imagined that science would now lead humanity into peace, prosperity, and automation, while others feared that atomic war would end the world. Writers like George Orwell, and another banger that I read off of Cliff Notes back in high school, 1984, saw things like authoritarian surveillance states, loss of freedom, and emotional control. Meanwhile, comics and serials still promoted optimistic space-age heroism, preparing kids for a bold new world. The 1940s fractured the idea of the future. On one side was hope, victory, technology, and peace. On the other side is terror, the possibility of total global destruction. This will honestly set a lot of new ground, giving us topics that are still echoed in film, TV, video games, media of today. Finally, a decade with an image of the future that we still cling on to in one way or another. The 1950s was a decade defined by contradiction. Post-war peace paired with Cold War paranoia, booming prosperity built on systemic exclusion, and a shiny, commercialized vision of the future that masked the anxiety underneath. This is the era where the American dream and the jet age future was sold off to the world. The US and the Soviet Union had a huge ideological clash, putting America's capitalist ways versus Soviet Russia's communist ideology. The arms race began, plaguing the nation, plaguing the world with the fear of what the power harnessed and atomic weaponry could really mean for the world. Senator Joe McCarthy would go on to accuse entertainers, artists, and politicians of being communists, causing the fear of un-American activity to drive censorship and conformity. Imagine anybody in America not being all for capitalism. Like, oh my god, the fear is, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. In Korea, the US fights communism, positioning themselves as the protector of freedom throughout the world. Under the presidency of Dwight D. Eisenhower, a war hero turned moderate conservative leader, we'd become more of a military industrial powerhouse. His focus was on prosperity, highways, and strong defense. And I know defense doesn't only apply to this, but every time I hear like a strong defense, I automatically think of like a football. You gotta have a good defensive line. Segregation grew as white families flooded the suburbs. The post-war baby boom was here, and schools, products, and advertising all targeted this new generation. The idea of the nuclear family was also pushed heavily and honestly realized in a lot of households. I mean, a mom who stayed home and did all the household duties, a father who went out to work the 9 to 5, 2 kids, dog, white picket fence. I mean, what more could you want? The civil rights movement would grow as segregation was still alive in the South, with moments like Brown versus the Board of Education, where segregation was abolished in schools, and Rosa Parks protest, which sparked the Montgomery bus boycott. Fun fact, man, my aunt went to Rosa Parks' funeral back in 2005, and she has like a little commemorative coin for her. It's pretty cool. I guess it's kind of ironic that I'm talking about Rosa Parks and I got on this Outcast shirt. I don't know, yo, I didn't plan it. Meanwhile, in the land of pop culture, TVs made their way into more and more homes. Shows like I Love Lucy, Leave It to Beaver, and The Ed Sullivan Show became hits around the nation. Rock and roll hit the mainstream as Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and Elvis Presley revolutionized music. Comic books came under fire as parenting groups and publications like The Seduction of the Innocents by Frederick Wertham criticized the medium and nearly killed most genres within the medium. The only genre that really pushed forward strongly was superheroes, and in much more stripped back ways. I mean, really the only heroes that were still doing their thing were like DC's guys and like Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. Marvel had all but stopped publishing superhero books for quite some time. The future started to become something that was actually real and realized in the 1950s. The interstate highway system began in 1956 and car culture exploded. The Soviet Sputnik rocket in 1957 started the space race, and kids started growing up dreaming of being astronauts. Nuclear energy went from being something that caused hysteria, paranoia, and fear in the early 50s to being something that was seen as futuristic by the late 50s, with even household appliances being branded as atomic. The electric kitchen, vacuum cleaners, and early TV remotes showed off futuristic living at the time. The 1950s provided an image of the future that is still cool and popular today, seen in shows like Fallout. Ads, magazines, and TV painted the future as fully automated with robot maids, flying cars, food and pills, and space vacations. The home was a control center, smooth, shiny, efficient, and nuclear powered. The architecture of interior designs became sleek in space age as motels, malls, and gas stations take on Jetson-like aesthetics. Walt Disney opened Disneyland with Tomorrowland as a key theme, with spaceports, monorails, and visions of the world of the future. Rides were sponsored by tech companies, pushing the boundaries of what's been done and what can be done. Science was really celebrated as the world began to dream of things like robot assistants and companions, while science fiction kind of had a few darker things like mutations stemming from a nuclear power. In comparison, the 1960s was a decade of rebellion, imagination, and radical dreaming. It's where the sleek futurism of the 50s collided with counterculture, civil unrest, and the vast unknown of space. The future was no longer just shiny and corporate, but it became political, it became psychedelic, it became Afrofuturistic, it became philosophical. In the political world, leaders like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, the Black Panther Party, and other grassroots groups defined a generational fight for justice and scored major victories like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights Act in 1965. The Vietnam War was cause for mass protest and disillusionment with the U.S. government. New left anti-war protests, student movements, and radical liberation groups challenged the establishment across all fronts. The assassinations of leaders like JFK in 1963, Malcolm X in 1965, Martin Luther King, and RFK in 1968 left the public scared and scarred by the violent loss of leaders and visionaries. Honestly, there are people that are still scarred by this stuff to this day. A few months back, I did a poetry event where an older guy performed a poem that he'd written about his thoughts and feelings about the murder of JFK as he watched this happen. Government programs sought to fight poverty and inequality in programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and Head Start. The largest generation of children in the U.S. history, and the boomers, began to come of age and reject their parents' morals as make love, not war, psychedelic culture, and free speech protests swept the college campuses. Women demanded liberation in a second wave of feminist movement. The LGBTQIA plus community begins to get their visibility as the Stonewall riots of 1969 sparked a public LGBTQIA plus movement. And beyond just civil rights, there's a movement, there's a call for self-determination, cultural pride, and political autonomy within the Black community. In the music front, Beatles mania began to take over. We all know about this, as well as acts like Jimi Hendrix, Bob Dylan, and the Rolling Stones beginning to reshape what music was up to that point. TV began to grow up as war, race, and politics entered living rooms, as well as escapist shows like Star Trek, Twilight Zone, and Batman reshaping how Americans imagined other worlds. 2001: A Space Odyssey was released in 1968, and that thing just broke all types of rules of what cinema could be, what you could do with a film, in a film. It really reset the landscape for what cinema was. The drug-fueled minds of the masses would turn posters, album covers, and fashion tricky. The aesthetic of the inner mind would meet the future. In the 60s, the future was kind of realized as the US was able to place the first men on the moon with the Apollo mission, marking a huge victory for the US in the space race. The early computers further advanced, and departments like NASA, DARPA, and Proto-Internet were born. And by the end of the decade, ATMs and very early video games would begin to pop up. The moon landing was a huge deal. It represented more than just a new scientific accomplishment, but it was almost spiritual, mythical, and symbolic of boundless human potential. Afrofuturism found its roots as Sun Ra with his cosmic jazz and film Space is the Place reimagined a future where black people are free from earthly oppression. Thinkers like Timothy Leary imagined consciousness expanding drugs as tools to unlock evolutionary progress, with communes popping up and envisioning alternative tech-free or tech-harmonized ways to live. The 60s was arguably one of the first decades to not really look at the future in terms of what tech could bring us, but what community and harmony could bring us. It was really more of a philosophical future than a physical future. Because with the way the future had been advancing up to that point, what more could we really hope for? We were on the right path. We just needed to get everything else together to match the oncoming tech. As science continued to advance, there was no need to hope for more. That was coming. What was being built towards in the 60s was a better society, not just a better world. And while this decade doesn't provide us with many images or concepts of the future, it provides us with ways of life and ideologies to take into the future that no generation seemed to do in the past. The future became political, psychedelic, and deeply human. Now, the 1970s was a decade of disillusionment, distrust, and a much darker future. If the 60s were about revolution and expanding the mind through drugs and partying metaphorically and literally, the 70s were the hangover, essentially, the wake-up call. There was an edge to the 70s, an edge that is often forgotten when portrayed in the media. The culture sobered up from the assassinations, war, and broken institutions, and the future stopped looking shiny and started looking corrupt, gritty, and fragile. The Vietnam War ended and the US lost. This was America's first televised loss. The fall of Satan was a major blow to the US's global confidence. All this while the public opinion on the military and government intervening in affairs was, on the downfall. This was fueled by the Watergate scandal leading to President Nixon's resignation in 1974. This was a time when a president's scandals would actually get them out of office instead of them somehow remaining in office, or even somehow getting another term. Anyway, the public trust for the office was shattered, not to mention the stalling of the economy backed by high unemployment and inflation, and oil and energy shortages added to the harshness. The EPA was formed in the 70s, and environmental disasters gave more fire to movements within the community. Roe versus Wade legalized abortions, and the LGBTQIA+ community, civil rights movement, and the feminist movements all got conservative pushback. The people of the US became more selfish. Self-help, personal growth, and finding yourself replaced activism for a lot of people. The Panthers movement would decline, but Black liberation evolved through art, music, and Pan-African identity. Feminists fought for the end of gender-specific roles and rights in the workplace, while pride parades take place and the community's visibility grows. Activism for land rights, language justice, and anti-imperialist politics gained steam with the Latino, Indigenous, and Asian American communities. We get a lot of films that really reflected the failures within the institution, mental breakdown, and anguish, and the feelings of alienation. In specific, films like The Godfather, Taxi Driver, Chinatown, Network, Apocalypse Now will be some of the biggest representations of this in film. Other films like Logan's Run, Soylent Green, and THX 1138 display more authoritarian and controlling futures. And toward the end of the decade, Star Wars will come along with a mythical, hopeful sci-fi adventure, but its rebellion versus empire story still echoed the times. In the world of music, acts like Donna Summers and the Bee Gees represented disco, Parliament Funkadelics represented funk, and Curtis Mayfield and Marvin Gaye were representations of soul. There was also the punk movement with artists like the Ramones and The Clash, and early hip-hop with Kool Herc came to the scene. The tech of the 1970s was pushed towards the future again, with PCs becoming a thing. If you don't know what a PC is, a personal computer. Apple and Microsoft were both founded mid-decade. Video game consoles would begin to hit households as the Atari was released, digital watches, microwaves, and early synths hit the market. All of these being small signs of the digital revolution to come. However, the 70s would be a bit of a precursor for the infamous future we would see portrayed in the 80s. Cities in ruin, government corruption, environmental collapse, cloning, mass surveillance. These futures were more of a caution sign rather than a dream we'd have elsewhere. Thinkers like Marshall McLuhan and sci-fi authors began to explore how media and machines affect human thought. And within the punk scene, the idea of no future became an anthem. In the world of Afrofuturism, Earth, Wind & Fire's album art and stage design fused cosmic mysticism, ancient Egypt, and space-age spirituality. And early hackers and tech enthusiasts began to imagine computers not just for corporations, but as tools for individual freedom and exploration. In all, the 1970s, even more so than the 1960s, really stopped trusting the institutions, and the future really reflected that. Where the 50s sold comfort and the 60s imagined freedom, the 70s asked, what if it all goes wrong? But in the cracks of that, a new future would begin to form, one that was black, rebellious, electronic, cosmic, and radically individualistic. In the 80s, futurism would become neon-lit, corporate-branded, digital, and very divided. This was by far the coolest looking future we'd seen up to this point. Chrome cities lined the streets, synth music played, flying cars soared through the skies, and cyberspace was the place to be. But underneath the glitz and glam, it was often a warning. As technology boomed and capitalism reached new heights, the visual language of the future shifted from dreamy utopias to hyper-surveillance, megacities, and techno-dystopias, reflecting aspects of the political and cultural landscape. With Ronald Reagan's presidency, he would promise free market capitalism and anti-communism. The Cold War reached its climax and ended within this decade, with Ronald Reagan referring to the USSR as the evil empire towards the beginning of the 80s, but by the end of the 80s, the Berlin Wall had fell and things were done. Reagan's presidency was also harmful for people of color, as he famously would crack down on drugs and ravage the black communities, filling up the populations of prisons with black and brown people. And HIV and AIDS would show up, being harshly blamed on the LGBTQIA community. In society, the 1980s was a real do-it-yourself, get-the-money type of era. A lot of films propped up the middle-class lifestyle. Rolexes, BMWs, and Wall Street suits were in. Also shoulder pads, like big old shoulder pads under that suit. Like, I don't know why that was fly, but it was fly for them. But in urban neighborhoods, hip-hop found its rise, being born from poverty, oppression, and creativity in the Bronx, and quickly spreading to the rest of New York and soon the entire nation. In the world of economics, homelessness spiked, the gap in financial inequality spread wider even as the stock market boomed. Public programs were slashed and hacked apart. Black feminists and thinkers like Audre Lorde criticized white feminism and the patriarchy as multiculturalism began to shape youth identity, especially in fashion, music, and literature. And this is something that we're missing today. I'll talk about that later, but multiculturalism and monoculture, like we're missing that today. Crazy, like we're missing that a lot. This was the MTV generation because once they launched in 1981, MTV made music visual, further cementing stars like Michael Jackson, Madonna, and Prince. Films like Blade Runner in 1982, The Terminator in 1984, Back to the Future in 1985, Aliens in 1986, and RoboCop in 1987 displayed futures ranging from dystopian, corporate, neon-lit, bright, and tech-heavy. Arcades dominated in the early 80s with video games like Donkey Kong, Pac-Man, and Galaga just going crazy. Home consoles would boom mid-decade with the release of the Nintendo in 1985. The world of tech pushed boundaries once again with Apple's release of the Macintosh computer in 1984, debuting with a commercial that made allusions to Orson Welles' 1984. The future of the 1980s was bold with neon lights, glowing cityscapes, chrome suits, and synthwave color palettes and purples, blues, and hot pinks. The future was imagined with cities packed with buildings so tall that they cloud the skies above, obscuring the sun as seen in films like Brazil. Cyberpunk was the wave with cyborgs, enhanced limbs, and tech infused in skin within the world of science fiction as seen in films like Terminator and RoboCop. Meanwhile, Tron brought cyberspace to life, picturing life inside the digital world as grids, light cycles, and glowing circuitry. Japan, and specifically Tokyo, will become a symbol of the future with advanced tech, anime, and city density influencing US design. Mad Max and Escape from New York showcased lawless, brutal worlds with no government and survival of the fittest. And what we'd eventually get decades later was imagined with VR headsets, data gloves, and cyberspace. The 1980s were the moment when the future became visual, commercial, and terrifying all at once. The sleek corporate controlled vision of tech utopia clashed with street-born cyberpunk and post-apocalyptic fears. For the first time, the future really wasn't about dreaming, it was really about surviving, but at the same time, in other places, it looked fun and inviting in films like Back to the Future. The 80s provided us with, honestly, one of the most visual and immersive futures to this date. Now we step into the 1990s, a decade of transition, tension, and techno-optimism. This era makes a pivot from gritty cynicism of the 70s and 80s into something more colorful, digital, and curious. The Cold War ends, the internet begins, hip-hop becomes global, and the future, it's no longer just dystopian, it's now interactive, playful, and on your screen. The Cold War was over. The Soviet Union dissolved in 1991 after the Berlin Wall fell in 1989. The U.S. broadcasted their venture into Iraq as a coalition is led into the country with night vision bombs and CNN being 24/7. As Bill Clinton marketed New Democrat centrism, prison populations boomed as mass incarceration worsened under the 1994 crime bill. All while welfare being reshaped gutted the support given to low-income families. Rodney King's brutal beating by the LAPD was the cause for riots in LA as the rest of America finally saw a glimpse of the police brutality being dealt upon the black community. And the Oklahoma City bombing of 1994, Waco siege, and the Columbine shooting in 1999 fueled the fire of growing domestic unrest. But as bad as all that other stuff was, not all was bad, as the country would honestly finally begin to try to start healing and to rectify some of the actions done by previous generations. Multiculturalism became a new buzzword as America began grappling with race, gender, and sexuality more openly. Though it was often shallow, it was a step in the right direction. Hip-hop took over the world as it really found its roots and really started to take over the mainstream with artists like Outkast, Missy Elliott, Biggie, Pac, Nas, Wu-Tang. We can go on and on and on with artists that were just doing their thing in the 90s and really starting to pop. These artists will begin to break through to the youth and really make some real noise within the scene. The streets of America was rising with gang violence and income gaps, as well as over-policing, while Silicon Valley and tech bros were sipping on lattes. Riot girls, zines, and college campuses became battlegrounds for sex, gender, and power. The LGBTQIA plus community had quite a few good wins as Ellen came to TV, along with the famous coming out episode. Will and Grace premiered, and the LGBTQIA plus identity started to show up more on television. But sadly, trans people remained on the sidelines, at least for now. The households of the 90s got a new edge as the teens and kids of this generation came with many different faces, from goth, grunge, ravers, skaters, hackers, all the various groups that you can place these kids into. There were many of them. The 90s teen was anti-conformist, ironic, and about remixing past aesthetics with future dreams. Tech began to stretch further and further as information became easily accessed and free, as long as you could afford a computer. The sound of dial-up internet was commonly found in homes as AOL message boards and emails were accessed. The dot-com boom was a thing too. Many tech startups got their legs in the 90s and dot-com names were purchased and sold off left and right. That is until the bubble burst, of course. Gaming leaped into the next generation with Game Boy Pockets and Color in 1996 and 1998 respectively, the PlayStation in 1994 in Japan and 1995 here in the US, the Nintendo 64 in 1996, and the advent of computer games. Ghost in the Shell 1995, Neon Genesis Evangelion, Akira 1988, but hits the US in the 90s, all shaped how we visualized future tech, cities, and spirituality. cool sci-fi tech and worlds were displayed more as everything from Power Rangers to Tamagotchis to MTV's liquid television oozed with weird digital futurism. Music videos became mini sci-fi films with acts like Busta Rhymes' Gimme Some More or Janet Jackson's What's It Gonna Be. We're pushing the boundaries and just doing all this weird shit with liquid metal. WWE, then known as the WWF, was going to war with TNT and WCW every Monday night as they brought a new cool and edge to professional wrestling. Grit, blood, sex, and violence made for routine viewing on a Monday night. And the same can be said for comic books. In Marvel and DC, things have been getting progressively more dark and gritty since the 1970s post the death of Gwen Stacy. And they began to lean towards a more extreme and more visual art style. There was also a comic book boom that happened there in the early 90s with artists becoming superstars, Image Comics being founded, giving a new haven for independent creators, and there was an eventual burst of that bubble towards the mid to late 90s. And just before the turn of the century, The Matrix would break the mold of science fiction cinema and pose the question, what if we're already living in a simulation? The 90s had cool ideas of the future with interfaces, grids, and HUD displays. The future was digital but clunky. Films like Lawnmower Man, early VR headsets, and CD-ROM games hinted at a future inside the screen. There was a colorful aesthetic to the time with colorful and futuristic tech ingrained in shows like Reboot, Dexter's Lab, and Batman Beyond, with dark imagery found in places on shows on liquid television like Aeon Flux and The Max. Artists like Missy Elliott and Outkast blended cosmic visuals, funk fashion, and digital weirdness into mainstream black expression. The 1990s imagined the future as open source, surreal, and unstable. There was a hopeful optimism for the future, but there was also a fear for the turn of the century. As the calendars crept closer to the year 2000, the fear of the Y2K bug and computers crashing out and glitching away all the progress we built was a real fear for many. If you don't know about the Y2K bug, and pretty much everybody knows about the Y2K bug, but it was because, computers initially only told the year with 99 rather than 1999, and people didn't think that computers would be able to handle going from 1999 to 2000. So, people thought like a whole infrastructure would be lost, everything that we were building, and it would just lead to the downfall of society. The transition from 99 to 2000 was hopeful and anxious. Society held its breath, wondering would the digital future collapse at midnight? The future became the new fashion with metallics, blue lighting, clean UIs, mobile phones, and leather gear. In 1998, the new iMac will bring a new futuristic look with a translucent colored back. On the surface, the 2000s looked cool, sleek, stylish, and new, but underneath more tension boiled as surveillance began, terrorism reshaped politics, and techno-anxiety deepened. The 1990s was almost a technological adolescence, like the beginning of puberty. It wasn't completely analog anymore, yet it hadn't come to a post-human stage. We were building the tools of the future, coding our way into a new era and imagining ourselves as gods inside machines, and the 2000s held a lot more excitement in store. Now, if you're like me, this is the decade that you are most excited to talk about. I was born in the year 2000, so I naturally feel a little bit superior to a lot of people being born at the turn of the millennium. So, we're gonna get into this thing. I don't think a lot of people understand how special that is to be born in the year 2000 or, relatively close to that year 99, 2001. One of those years surrounding the turn of the millennium. We arguably are the first real online generation. We grew up as the internet really was coming into its own. We experienced internet havens for kids like Pop Tropica, Y8 Games, Club Penguin, and all the rest of the cool spaces for kids. We spent a large amount of time outside as we still were into that. Social media was in its infancy, so we weren't chronically online. We also grew up with arguably the best era of channels like Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, and Disney Channel. We were one of the last generations to truly experience a singular culture before social media and its algorithms pushed us all further and further into our niches, drawing digital lines in the sand, dividing the world more and more. The digital dreams of the 90s began to come true, but in often strange and heavy and often terrifying ways. The optimism of the dot-com boom gave way to war, paranoia, mass surveillance, and the early architecture of the world we live in today. Within less than 2 years of the 2000s, America would experience the most violent and devastating terrorist attack of all time, changing a lot of the country's outlook. Nearly 3,000 people died in the 9/11 terrorist attack, and while it did leave the country rattled, it also brought a great sense of patriotism and togetherness to the nation. The war on terror was in full effect as the U.S. invaded Afghanistan and Iraq in 2001 and 2003, respectively. Surveillance programs expanded and the Patriot Act was signed. Freedom became a military slogan. George W. Bush brought a neoconservative approach to his presidency, covering with faith-driven politics and post-9/11 fear-mongering. Also,
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
He don't care. Hurricane Katrina in 2005 exposed the government's failure to respond to black suffering, especially in times of disaster and need. This was a pivotal moment of disillusionment. In 2008, though, the black community would have a huge victory when Barack Obama was elected into office as president. This was a true sign of growth and change. This was huge. And this was everywhere for quite some time. This was the first black man elected into the office of presidency. And it was like a true sign that times truly changed. And I remember back when we were kids, it was my 3rd grade year when President Barack Obama had gotten elected. And I remember my teacher pushed the TV into the room and we went downstairs and got our lunches and came back upstairs and we sat in our classroom and watched the inauguration. And it was truly inspiring. I told my mom that I wanted to be president after that. That was just so cool to me. Also, I had a crush on his daughter, so that was dope too. I was dreaming of reliving the Disney Channel movie. You know what I'm saying? 2008 also held a financial crisis as Wall Street collapsed. Millions lost homes, jobs, and savings. The economy spiraled, and as always, while the rich rebelled out, the working class felt the pain the most. This market crash set the stage for the rise of anti-establishment politics and online radicalism in the 2010s. Post 9/11, surveillance went up as Homeland Security, TSA, NSA wiretaps became normalized. Hip-hop continued to grow and evolve as GOATs like Lil Wayne, Kanye West, Missy Elliott, Outkast, Jay-Z, 50 Cent, and more pushed fashion and politics in their music and also experimented. As I said earlier, monoculture would begin to crumble just a little bit as we would get more blogs, the first social media sites, YouTube, and more things popping up, and those algorithms, like I said, just push you further into your own niche and remove you further from the wider spread of what's going on in pop culture. MySpace came out in 2003, Facebook in 2004, YouTube in 2005, Twitter in 2006. Even us in elementary school had Facebook and MySpace accounts. Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed by 2010 as queer media slowly expanded and the beginning of nostalgia-based culture began as the 80s and 90s would begin to be recycled and redone, starting the cycle of looking back rather than forward. Apple dropped their first iPhone in 2007, ushering in a new era for phones and tech. And before that, the iPod put your whole music catalog in your pocket, giving more convenience to the listener. Shows like American Idol, Jersey Shore, Survivor, The Simple Life made reality TV the newest hot thing in America, arguably setting the groundwork for the future live streamers that we have today. Children of Men, The Roadmap, Minority Report, iRobot, The Matrix Reloaded. Films like these showed a future that was now hyper-surveilled, collapsing, and automated. At the same time, comic books and superheroes got their rise in the cinema landscape as in the late 90s, Blade, in 2000, X-Men, and in 2002, Spider-Man would hit the screen of cinemas all over the world. This is when superheroes refound their cool and became even bigger pop culture icons than they'd been before. Gaming became more of a mainstream mainstay as games like Halo, Call of Duty, GTA, The Sims, World of Warcraft became worldwide phenomena. with both children and adults, that is. Hip-hop became more digital as albums like 808s and Heartbreaker, even Parts of Graduation, shook the frame and would go on to inspire and influence the future of not just hip-hop, but music in general. Now, the future in the 2000s. That shit looked sick as fuck. The early 2000s gave us a nearly completely chrome future. It was slick, sharp, sexy, and cool. It felt like we were at the precipice of something special and cool. Futuristic fonts, colorful translucents, metallic chrome textures, extremely shiny and future-like. The turn of the millennium boasted an almost alien-like style. There's also the Gen X soft club aesthetic, characterized by soft green wash tones with fast-paced, blurred, mundane backgrounds, like Matrix bullet time on a freeze frame. And honestly, yo, like, looking at the music videos of the time, like, a lot of those contain way more bullet time than you could find in the entire Matrix series. The tech of the decade got cool and diverse. Honestly, the 2000s was the last decade of consistent tech growth. Like, we would have everything tech would be either a colorful translucent or just chrome, and it was just, everything looked so cool. Like, design was like a key factor rather than just having something that worked. Design mattered a lot when it came to what tech was going to be. Like, while we got growth within the 2010s, in the 2000s it was nearly constant and every update was meaningful. Today we get new iPhones every year with not much new, but in the 2000s every new phone, new computer, new TV, DVD player, everything had something new that was a meaningful upgrade from the previous model. It felt like tech was in a constant state of growth, and it was always exciting. Things began to get smaller. We went from huge box TVs to plasma screens, and in the early 2010s, like just all-out flat screens. We got iPods, MP3 players. Phones tried new, cool, and sleek designs, trying to really live in the future, and some of them got really far out there. I mean, it was fun though. The Mick Bling, Fruitiger Aero, Fruitiger Metro, Webcore, Gen X Soft Club, Scene, Global Village Coffee House, Y2K, and Y2K Futurism aesthetics reigned supreme in this decade. Fruitiger Aero and Metro in particular, towards the mid and latter parts of the decade, would really begin to give us a different image of what the future could be that bled into the early 2010s. Fruitiger Metro being a slight precursor to the minimalism that came to be in the 2010s, and Fruitiger Aero giving a sharp nature, inclusive designs of a future that seems so achievable, yet we haven't been able to completely achieve it. I mean, well, that's like outside of Japan, because they're like clearly on their way to something like that. I mean, they got the infrastructure, the public transit. Like, I don't know why we don't take more and more cues from Japan, because like they've obviously gotten their shit, a lot of their shit together over there. And as we bled more into the 2010s, the world began to shift to being even more online. We became more and more obsessed with the past and looking back at what was instead of what could be. iPhone gave everyone a portal, Facebook became an empire, and the dream of the future faded into algorithms, timelines, and nostalgia filters. We now step into the 2010s, the decade where the future began to lose its shape. It lost its vision. It became less about what could be and more about what is and what was predominantly. The 2010s shifted into something more invisible, curated, and corporate. Rather than the vibrant images of the future that we had in the past, the world became fully digitized, and in that, we lost something special. We lost a dream. We lost the image of tomorrow, and we traded it in for building lives based on feeds, branding, and reboots of the past. But what we lacked in images of new tech and bolder futures, we gained in acceptance and understanding. President Obama will win a second election, reigning another 4 years in office. The U.S. saw what was considered a huge win in the assassination of Osama bin Laden, co-founder of Al-Qaeda. In 2011, protesters took to Wall Street, rallying against the 1% of the nation and the Occupy Wall Street movement. Sparked by the murders of Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, Sandra Bland, and many more, the Black Lives Matter movement was born as innocent black people were murdered by police officers or citizens in cold blood, with little to no repercussions. Police brutality was a hot button issue. Like, I remember back in humanities, world studies, and government classes back in high school, like, these were topics that we would frequently talk about and debate, not just with our teachers, but amongst ourselves, our classmates and peers, about like what's going on here. There was a rise in violence in schools, calling mass calls for stricter gun laws. The Me Too movement gave women and other victims of SA the support, strength, and platforms they need to speak out against their aggressors and to seek justice. Many stars in Hollywood spaces and music scenes were rightfully taken down a peg or two and finally delivered a punishment for their years of transgressions. Facial ID recognition, location tracking, and predictive policing became normalized within society. In 2016, running off of a campaign fueled on populism, online rage, and disinformation, Donald Trump would beat Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton in the presidential race. This will give white nationalists pride and a newfound sense of boldness in their views, and it also put democracy in a fragile feeling state. We started living our lives on computers and started performing for the algorithms and those dopamine hits that we would get from those likes and comments on those social media platforms. Anxiety, burnout, loneliness, all these things skyrocketed, especially amongst youth on the social media generation. This is partially due to social media, but also because of the destigmatization of these feelings and emotions. Mental health finally got its awareness, and a lot of people got some much needed help. The trans, non-binary, and gender-queer communities would get some long-awaited recognition, with gender-neutral bathrooms being put in place in a lot of places. We began to define and coin new terms such as toxic masculinity, gaslighting, and emotional labor. Extremists began to rear their heads as people realized that you could use the internet to troll people while hiding in the comfort of their homes. The internet went from its arguable peak in the early parts of the decade to a place where antics and upping the debauchery is rewarded. Success was no longer just about talent, but about who could do the wildest thing. Stealing from stores on cameras, dangerous pranks labeled as social experiments, teenagers holding RPGs in their living rooms, music videos laced with scantily clad women, drugs, and guns became all too commonplace, muddying the pool of actual talent with tomfoolery and bullshit. With the rise of social media apps and sites like Instagram, YouTube, Vine, and places like SoundCloud, Spotify, and Apple Music having low barriers to entry, making being a creator easier than ever. Not gonna lie, that part benefited me a lot. TV would begin to put up fierce competition with films, and this admittedly began with shows like The Sopranos and The Wire in the early 2000s, but really finding its real course with shows like Game of Thrones, Black Mirror, Atlanta, Mr. Robots, the 80s themed Netflix show Stranger Things. These shows would honestly like rival films, and these would be like the talk of the town for a while. Like, honestly, I was like just about to turn 16 when Stranger Things came out like 2016 in summer. It came out just a little bit before I turned 16. I'm going on 25 now. I'll be 25 before the final season of that show came out, and that's only the 5th season. That is insane. I honestly fell out of the show midway through the 4th season though. Like, I stand by my thought that they should have just ended it after the 3rd. Elsewhere in the land of film, the MCU became a cultural phenomenon. Films like Captain America Civil War, Black Panther, Avengers Infinity War, and Avengers Endgame were landmark cultural events. Fans, including me, flooded theaters to see these films. Honestly, these films were like huge moments. Like, I remember people at my school who like I knew did not really give that many fucks about comic books, but they were talking about these movies and like, yo, you going to see that new Avengers this weekend? You going to see Black Panther? You going to see this, that? And I'm sitting here like, yo, I've been into this shit. Like, now y'all are into this shit. For Black Panther, it was a strong sense of cultural pride. Tons of schools bought tickets for their entire classes. This wasn't the first film with a black superhero, but it was the first one to this degree. It was a critically acclaimed black director crafting a black story with African characters. It meant a lot to us. Star Wars, Blade Runner 2049, Stranger Things, The Lion King, Matrix Resurrections relived the past, bringing back more and more of what was old. And the audiences ate it all up, giving the message to the companies that We were content living our past rather than embracing our futures. Hip-hop grew to even greater heights with artists like Kendrick Lamar earning Pulitzers for his album Damn, creating classics and making songs that would become anthems for the BLM movement and Alright. Drake and Kanye West continued to bring hip-hop into an even more mainstream and pop direction, and the trap and drill music scenes made a generation of kids glorify violence, bravado, and drugs. Yo, I'm not saying it's nothing wrong with that music. Like, y'all listen to hella drill music, listen to hella trap music, but I mean, I'm just pointing out the fucking facts. SoundCloud artists began to break into the mainstream, proving that the DIY style of hip-hop could truly turn you into a superstar. Memes became the main source of comedy on the internet, with everything being memed. The aesthetics of companies would get simpler and simpler, with minimalist styles becoming the new style for most all companies. Mascots began to disappear and everything adopted easy and minimal designs, making most things look the same. At the time, it was a welcome change because we'd been getting high-octane, heavily designed images, logos, and designs, and everything else for like so long, so the more drawn back and simple designs seemed to be clean and new compared. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I remember the first time seeing a lot of these new aesthetics, the more minimalized designs, and I thought they were cool, I thought they were sleek, I thought they were futuristic. But as I kept seeing them, they became less emblematic of the future and more emblematic of bland and corporate. A lot of people are getting tired of this aesthetic at this point in time, and we've begun to harken back to designs that were more lively. We begin to see more VR tech and augmented reality become things. Life would also begin to feel like a simulation at times. People would constantly post weird things that they noticed, and the entire nation would experience Mandela effects. Apparently, these things never actually looked or were the way that we all remembered them being, but they were a different way. Whatever. Heading into the next decade, there was a lot of excitement. Like, I remember a lot of my friends and a lot of people on social media making allusions to the Great Gatsby, ready to come into the 2020s and just like party the decade away. But we were in for a super rude awakening. I mean, like, we'd be faced with a global pandemic, more violence from both police and in schools, more sexual assault allegations, more climate control issues, and an economic low point that we have yet to escape to this day. The 2020s has been a pretty rough decade to this point. I mean, like, the 2010s made the future feel surreal and hard to imagine, but like, the 2020s has made the future just like completely unimaginable, period. Now, I'm not trying to say like there's no hope and nothing's gonna happen. I mean, of course we're gonna have a future, but like, it is hard to imagine what a future could be like outside of what the modern day is at this very moment. We no longer dream of tomorrow in clear visuals or stories, but instead we brace for it. There's not a lot of wonder for what tomorrow may hold, but rather survival is the key concept that pushes us forward. At the turn of the decade, Donald Trump lost his second run for presidency to Democratic candidate and former Vice President Joe Biden. Before leaving, though, there was a call for protests and storms by right extremists storming the Capitol. Trump passed bills and policies that will ravage the economy for the common man. These are policies that Joe Biden would spend his time in office trying to set things back on course, but there are other things that would sting as well, as just as his presidency began, we would be shut down as COVID-19 pandemic would spread across the globe and causing deaths of many. And all of this was happening while we had a curfew in place because post the George Floyd death and a few other deaths of black people by police officers, there were riots in the streets and protests. Rioters took to the streets across the country, looters damaged and raided shops, police fought back, and martial law was enforced in many places. There's been a rise in disinformation on major news networks and smaller publications using buzzwords and eye-catching headlines to reel you in to get that click. In warring countries like Ukraine, Gaza, Israel, and Iran have been the cause for many protests in the past 3 years. A lot of us in Gen Z and like the younger millennials grew up knowing nothing but climate doom, mass shootings, rent crisis, and digital burnout. The housing market has been ripped apart as housing prices skyrocket. Inflation is through the roof and many Americans can't afford groceries. Anxiety, depression, and loneliness are at an all-time high. Pandemic isolation, social media toxicity, and doom scrolling are playing major roles in this. School, work, and many other things have moved to remote spaces, depriving people of any real live human interaction. Conversations around gender and neurodivergence, disability, queerness, and anti-colonialism deepened as marginalized groups would gain voices and mass support. Though there are still a lot of bigots out there who must believe that like sexuality rubs off from proximity or something, I don't know. The rich have gotten richer, and they've mostly begun to radicalize. The division between classes feels more pronounced than ever. With the TikTok era, trends become more and more passing, as some only last a few weeks or even days. The average attention span has been depleted, he said in his 15-minute plus video. Honestly, this thing might be an hour. Studies show that the average human has an attention span of about 8.25 seconds. This is a drop from 12 seconds in 2000, and it's even smaller than that of a goldfish being at 9 seconds. That means that even goldfish can focus on topics longer than most humans can. This was caused by the surge in short-form content that began to take off in the 2010s. TikTok, Vine, Reels, Shorts. We've been programmed to only be able to take so much at a time. Songs have gotten shorter and shorter. TV shows are usually dropped all at once and disappear from the public consciousness and forethought within weeks of their completion. NFTs were a thing for like a few months, and I told all my friends like, yo, that's gonna pass. It's gonna be like Beanie Babies. It's gonna be like Pogs or something, dude. And they were all into it, like, AI begins to surge throughout culture, with some people using it as a tool to help fuel creativity, research, and development, but others using it to do their work for them. AI art is growing at a rapid rate. It's at times getting hard to tell when something is AI and when it's not. As I said before in the past, I don't believe that AI is a good thing or a bad thing, but rather a tool. And like all tools, you can use them for good or bad. You can use a hammer to build a house and build something good, or you can bludgeon somebody's head in. You could use a pen to write a beautiful play or a sonnet or a song, or you could jab somebody's eyes out. Just depends on how you use your tools. There are a lot of people using AI in a way that does not benefit the masses. There are even people out there using ChatGPT as their confidant and therapist. This is when the use of a tool becomes dangerous. It's almost as if the warnings we gotten in the past about AI and science fiction was actually warranted. Predictions became that of disaster. Franchises that have existed for a while, like Fallout and The Last of Us, got TV adaptations, as well as new films and TV like Don't Look Up, foretelling of disasters and ill-fated political promotion off of public grief. With all this anxiety and harshness going on at the time, people began to look back. We now emulate the styling of the 2000s, doing things that were once seen as passé fashion trends. They're now cool again. We're now adapting material from the 2000s and up. Disney just dropped a remake of 2002's Lilo and Stitch, and DreamWorks just released a live-action remake of a film that only 15 years old, How to Train Your Dragon. In the music scene, drill, rage beats, and alt R&B, glitchcore, anti-pop, Afro beats, reggaeton, regional sounds are now the sounds of the nation as the mainstream gets a new facelift. The 2020s don't really dream of the future in a grand unified way. There is no singular tomorrow we're building toward. Instead, we're surviving the future in real time. We're going through the motions as monoculture has been eradicated by our algorithms, forcing us all into echo chambers, shutting us off from other parts of the world and culture. Nostalgia is comforting us as capitalism and climate crisis stole our dreams. And in those ashes, we're trying to imagine smaller, radical, communal, and spiritual alternatives. I don't think there's a singular reason for the state of the world, but I think there's one big reason that has sprouted multiple symptoms, and that is social media. As I said, social media and its algorithms kind of put us in echo chambers where we really only hear thoughts and opinions similar to that of our own. So like if you feel one way, you're going to get more and more feedback validating those thoughts, and it's just going to make you really feel that way. And I mean, that can be about anything, you know what I mean? It's really just radicalizing your thoughts. From like the most nuanced thing and niche thing to like bold political statements, it can do that to you. Convenience and commodification of everything has left many youths not knowing how to survive without cellular devices, or even knowing how to do simple household tasks that came natural to the past generations. So is nostalgia really killing us? I don't think so. If hope is a thing, I'd hope that eventually the storm passes and more original films, music, and television comes. It feels like studios are starting to understand that at least a little bit, with remakes being less profitable and original films like Sinners taking the world by storm. It's a hopeful outcome that studios get their act together and put something out new. And that's not me implying that Sinners is the only recent original film that is good, because I've seen plenty, but it's one of the slim few recent films that was as heavily promoted as all the IP-driven films in the past. And look, I'm not saying nostalgia or IP is bad. I love characters like the Ninja Turtles, in Marvel, DC, Star Wars, and more. I love watching back and listening to old music, discovering things that came out before I was born or even when I was here, but just too young to get into it. The Y2K Futurism, and Gen X soft club aesthetics, those really take me back to simpler times, you know what I mean? And back when all I really worried about was watching shows like Ed, Edd n Eddy, getting new action figures, playing with my GBA or Nintendo DS, PlayStation 2, whatever. And the Fruitiger Arrow and Metro designs, they give me vivid flashbacks of days when I would play on my PS3, Xbox 360, and be in live chats and stuff. But the thing is, I feel like we're not looking enough towards the future. If history reveals anything, and it usually does, it shows that, these things go in cycles. We will begin to dream again, but as of now, we're just trying to survive and escape the hostile political climate of the day, the regression in public's acceptance of different races, sexes, genders, and all. I mean, right now, Donald Trump is in his second presidency, and within 6 months, he's launched rockets on Iran, sent out ICE troops to rip families apart and embolden white supremacists, freeing rioters from the January 6th attacks on the Capitol. Now, look, I don't mean to get super political, but talking about a topic like this in the way that we're really trying to understand it, I feel like we kind of have to dive into politics to understand them. And looking at it, I honestly don't feel like this country has ever been great at any time for anybody that's not a white cisgender male. But even so, we're still regressing. Me and my wife, my friends, my family, we have these conversations a lot. It feels like the country is in shambles and we're more divided than we've been in decades. With everything going on, I don't think the real question should be whether or not nostalgia is killing us. I believe it's giving us a much needed comfort at the moment. I think we need to ask, whatever happened to the land of the free? This isn't the country we've been led to believe it is. In fact, we're moving in the opposite direction of where we need to be, where this country claims it is. Not only that, but other things like the dead internet theory, the misuse of AI as people's companions and therapists, and the modern state of being online, and especially social media. Life is beginning to feel more and more like an episode of Black Mirror. It's beginning to feel like, rather than being thoroughly entertained, we should have been taking cues and hints. And nostalgia can be a good way to ease one's mind and give them some much needed comfort in times of such uncertainty. And while I do think nostalgia is mad oversaturated and we need more new people to come along and actually show up for new things, I don't think it's killing us. I'd be lying if I said I'm not super nostalgic for a few of these eras discussed here, or that I don't look at other eras and wonder what it must have been like to live in those times. You could probably just hear the way that I've talked about certain eras here and just kind of catch the cues and know which eras those are. Nostalgia is not a bad thing, and in times like this, it's the comfort from it is very welcome. We just need to remember to keep things fresh as well. We need character and individuality in branding. We need more love and care in advertising. We need more interaction, more to do. We need to dream of newer and bolder futures. We may have just come up with all the inventions that really give us the convenience that we needed, but we don't need any updates and upgrades that only change things that aren't broken to begin with. But most of all, we just need to come together and remember where we were headed before and try to get this shit back on course. I honestly believe it will happen, but when? Well, I guess all things will be revealed in the future. Yo, what's going on, man? My name is Sean D'Lo. If you don't know already, you watched this whole video. I'm assuming this is over an hour long at this point, or going on an hour long at this point. I'm an artist. I'm a rapper. I do whatever. Y'all should check out the Broken Dreamers music website, brokendreamersmusic.com. Check out my newest mixtape, Egress 2. Did my thing on there. Wherever you listen to music at, I need to get it uploaded to SoundCloud. I've been slacking on that. yeah, check me out. Check out my music on YouTube. Sean Dlo, SEAND''LO. Hopefully I'll be back with some more dope stuff like this. I don't know. I was just really moved to make a video about this. At first, it was just gonna be like an article, and I was like, "Yo, we're gonna make this into a video too." So, yeah. I mean, we're gonna do something like this. I will holler at y'all later, and deuce.